Even weeks after the first catastrophic breach, the night sky was still choked by a perpetual haze. A thick gray film clung to the moon, shining a sickly glow on the empty streets below. Buildings loomed like mausoleums, twisted silhouettes of what once symbolized human innovation and industry. Every so often, a roar or shriek echoed through the alleyways, punctuated by the patter of scurrying shapes that no longer resembled any single living creature known before the splicing began. Before the outbreak, rumors had circulated about a state-of-the-art laboratory hidden in the city, funded by corporations hungry for profit and governments desperate for breakthroughs. It was said to focus on genetic splicing, fusing different life forms in an attempt to harness beneficial traits. Amphibious tolerance to toxins, or toxins to protection power, or the muscular power of large mammals. Few people in town knew the specifics. Most dismissed the whispers as conspiracies. It sounded too outlandish, too much like a horror story meant to scare curious minds. Anything that might have definitely attested to reality or myth was swiftly quelled by official statements from the city council. There is no such facility. These rumors are baseless. But one sweltering evening, everything changed. Without warning, piercing alarms erupted across multiple city blocks, seeming to come from below the pavement. No official warnings were broadcast and no notifications lit up phones, just the haunting call of klaxons. Then glass shattered and metal groaned in the distance. Only later did people learn about the hidden facility's meltdown, some catastrophic system failure that broke the containment pods wide open, releasing horrors upon the city. Joe was among the first to witness the aftermath. A local journalist with a knack for sniffing out the truth, she'd staked out areas rumored to be near the facility's secret entrances. That night, she saw shadowy figures spill from a collapsed parking garage, their bodies twisted and disfigured. The stench was immediate, an acrid odor that stung her nostrils. It was a smell of chemicals mixed with the unmistakable reek of raw flesh. She tried to approach with caution, camera in hand, but as she switched on her flashlight, she froze. The beam illuminated a creature that seemed half wolf, half snake, with reptilian scales covering its muzzle and a thick tail slithering behind its muscled hind legs. It hissed, revealing fangs far too numerous for any normal mammal. Joe stumbled back, her breath caught in her throat. The wolf-snake hybrid locked eyes with her, and she realized it could move as swiftly as it could hiss. Mustering every bit of courage, she snapped a quick photograph before fleeing. That singular image would later become an icon of the city's downfall. In the days that followed, the creatures multiplied. No official rescue arrived. The city was deemed a quarantine zone. Residents received a single, abrupt government announcement. Stay indoors, barricade all entrances, and do not engage the animals. The statement came too late for many. Groups of hybrids roamed the city, some traveling alone while others formed predatory packs. Their screams filled the night. Combinations of teeth, claws, and barbed appendages made them nearly unstoppable by normal means. And they displayed an alarming level of cunning, as if retaining the intelligence of every species spliced into them. Now only the most resilient survivors remained. Joe's initial terror gave way to grim resolve. She realized documenting the horrors might be the only evidence left of government negligence, or whatever deeper conspiracies had spurred the creation of these monsters. With her camera strapped close, she found a small group of survivors holed up inside a dilapidated library, concrete walls thick enough to keep the abominations at bay, and tall windows that could serve as vantage points. Among these survivors was Vince, a paramedic who'd been on duty when the alarm sounded. He carried a portable medical kit and seemed unwavering in his dedication to save lives, even if the city's official emergency services were nowhere to be found. Ava, an ex-military engineer, had salvaged a generator from a nearby mechanic shop and rigged it behind the library. Its hum was kept so low it was nearly inaudible, ensuring the group had some electricity and dim lighting without attracting unwelcome attention. A handful of other refugees, too traumatized to offer specialized skills, tried their best to fortify the library's doors each night. They shared hushed stories in the library's main reading room, its once grand interior now strewn with upended bookshelves, shattered glass, and half-burned newspapers. A single battered desk lamp provided light as everyone gathered, Joe recounted her glimpse of the snake wolf. Vince spoke of the spidery gorilla-like creature he'd spotted climbing an apartment complex, using adhesive webbing from its wrists to scale walls. A mother who'd found her way to the library wept as she described the day she lost her teenage daughter in an alley. A half-avian beast swooped down and snatched the girl away. The library walls had started smelling musty. A thick coat of dust covered old tomes, and roaches scurried along the corners. The survivors took turns standing guard at the windows, scanning the streets for any sign of approaching nightmares. Although they'd occasionally see one or two monstrous hybrids sniffing around, the creatures didn't seem to organize an assault. Not yet, anyway. But it was only a matter of time. Resources were dwindling. Water still trickled from a rusted pipe in the basement, though it tasted metallic. Food stocks were dangerously low. They'd raided a nearby convenience store early on, but it had barely sustained them. Starvation lurked on the horizon. One evening, Ava devised a plan to find more substantial provisions. She reasoned that if they could get an old truck running, they could head to a larger supermarket on the other side of the city. It was a risky mission, but staying put guaranteed slow death. Joe volunteered to accompany her. Vince, knowing the immediate danger, also decided to join, hoping to rescue any wounded survivors they might encounter. 3 others insisted on coming along, perhaps out of a desperate need to do something that might improve their prospects. In total, the group of 6 prepared to venture out. They armed themselves with anything that could serve as a weapon: crowbars, baseball bats wrapped in barbed wire, a makeshift flamethrower that Ava had cobbled from an old aerosol canister, and a pilot light. None of them believed these tools were enough to handle every horror out there, but fear demanded at least a semblance of defense. They left the library just before dawn, the sky an ominous grayish pink. The stench in the air had grown stronger, signaling that something unnerving lurked nearby. The group moved in a tight formation, eyes continually scanning. As they turned a corner, they encountered the remains of a tattered blockade. It seemed the city officials had indeed tried to quarantine the area with spiked steel fencing and barbed wire, but the twisted metal lay in tatters, shredded as if by a monstrous blender. Blood splatters darkened the ground. They stepped over spent bullet casings that glinted in the pale light, a silent testament to a hopeless last stand. A shrill cry made them freeze. Nobody dared speak. Then, pattering footsteps sounded down the block, and a shape lean, hunched, and freakishly agile dashed across an intersection. Loose, matted fur clung to a body that also featured chitinous scales. One of its limbs bent at a disquieting angle, yet it propelled itself with terrifying speed. Ava motioned for everyone to get down. They hid behind a wrecked car, hearts pounding. A second shape lumbered into view, a fusion of what looked like a kangaroo's powerful hind legs and the trunk of a boar-like torso, topped with enormous tusks. The boaroo snorted, scanning the area with bloodshot eyes that glowed faintly. The smaller abomination slinked closer, and the two sniffed each other. They uttered guttural growls as though forming plans. Joe recalled reading about advanced genetic splicing research that aimed to develop ideal biomachines for various tasks: soldier hybrids, field labor creatures, or specialized search and rescue chimeras. Clearly the experiment had progressed to horrifying extremes, melding creatures that should never share the same genome. She snapped a photo with her camera, the soft click nearly indiscernible, yet the boaroo's ears perked. It swung its conjoined head, scanning the debris. The group held their breath. After a tense moment, the animal snorted again, apparently unconvinced. The pair meandered on, disappearing behind the shell of a bus that had crashed sideways into a coffee shop. When the coast seemed clear, Ava led them onward. Their path took them through a labyrinth of shattered store windows, decomposing remains and roads fractured by neglected infrastructure. Every corner meant a potential confrontation. All the while, a dreadful knowledge weighed on their minds. The creatures' numbers were increasing, either reproducing or, worse yet, continuing to trickle up from that hidden facility. Perhaps more splicing pods had cracked open. As they forged ahead, the silence gave way to distant thunder. Dark clouds pressed low, promising rain. By the time the group reached a salvage yard, where Ava hoped to find a functional vehicle, the skies unleashed a torrential downpour. Sheets of rain hammered the corrugated metal fences, turning patches of dirt into swamps. The stench of rotting flesh grew thicker, stirring queasiness in several of them. Yet, it also offered a small advantage. The rainfall might mask their scent from the creatures. Leaving the others to stand guard near the entrance, Ava slipped inside the yard with Joe in tow. They crept among rusted car frames stacked haphazardly. A squeaking gate around the corner suggested something was in motion. Ava raised her makeshift flamethrower while Joe readied her crowbar. They rounded a battered Toyota and witnessed a sickening sight. A monstrous figure hunched over a partially dismembered body. The creature's back sported spines reminiscent of a stegosaurus, but it bore a hyena's muzzle, stained with fresh gore. It snapped its jaws repeatedly before it froze, as though sensing a new presence. Ava gestured for Joe to move around it, but then Joe's foot caught on a twisted piece of metal, producing a loud clang that rang in the drumming rain. The creature snapped its head around and bared an array of crooked teeth. Joe yelled for Ava to fire. Ava squeezed the modified valve, releasing a burst of flame. The stench of singed flesh and hair filled the air as the flame grazed the spliced monster. It howled in pain, stepping back, but not retreating. In a frenzy, it lunged forward, jaws snapping. Joe swung the crowbar, landing a glancing blow across its muzzle. It stumbled momentarily, letting out a jagged screech. Ava opened the valve again, this time sending a fiercer plume of fire directly at it. The creature staggered and collapsed into a smoldering heap against the side of a cargo van. Nearby, the others rushed in, having heard the commotion. Vince checked the victim's remains, though it was clear there was nothing he could do. Ava reeled from the adrenaline, gingerly kicking the charred hybrid to ensure it lay still. Her eyes flickered with a mix of disgust and triumph. "We have to move, more will come," Joe warned, scanning the yard for motion. They located a battered old pickup with a decent exterior. Chances were it might still run if they could find a charged battery. They rummaged around and found a possibly compatible battery in a wrecked SUV. Vince noticed the fluid levels were not entirely bone dry. There was a glimmer of hope, albeit slim. After laborious tinkering in the rain, Ava managed to install the battery and hotwire the engine. The pickup coughed to life, sputtering but functional. All 6 survivors piled in. The seats reeked of mold and trash littered the floor. They left the salvage yard, headlights slicing through the downpour. For a moment, hope ignited a small spark in each of them. Surviving felt slightly more attainable when they had wheels. The plan: head to the large supermarket near the old stadium, gather supplies swiftly, and return to the library if possible. They sped through deserted streets. Water sloshed around piles of rubble, reflecting twisted images of broken neon signs. At an intersection, a figure darted out, another spliced horror, bigger than anything they'd seen yet. It looked part lion, part scorpion, with a thick, stinging tail that dripped a greenish liquid. The truck skidded as Ava tried to veer around it. The creature hissed, scraping its claws against the wet asphalt. Before it could strike, Ava slammed the accelerator, ramming the beast's flank. The truck lurched violently, throwing everyone inside against the seats. Fur and scales scraped across the hood, but the creature rolled off to the side, letting out a furious snarl before vanishing into the gloom. Their hearts pounded, minds reeling. Soon, the looming structure of the supermarket came into view, a massive building that once supplied thousands of people. They drove into the adjacent parking lot, which was filled with abandoned cars coated in grime and litter. The building's front entrance was partly collapsed, with broken glass littering the sidewalk. "We'll get whatever we can," Joe said, stepping out into the steadily cascading rain. "Non-perishables mainly. Let's move quickly." Inside, darkness ruled. The store's interior lighting was dead. Shelves lay overturned. Boxes of cereal were torn open, their contents scattering across foul puddles. Crates of produce had become compost heaps, disguised for who knew how many insects. The survivors split into small subgroups to rummage for canned goods, dried pasta, first aid supplies, and bottled water. They snatched up as many intact items as they could. Vince found a stash of water purification tablets at the pharmacy section, while Ava gathered every medical supply left behind in locked cabinets. Flashlights flickered in the dismal aisles, revealing broken overhead mirrors and signs dangling precariously. The store creaked under the weight of the storm, each gust rattling the sliding doors, which no longer worked. Anxiety thickened the air. The place was too big, too open, too many shadows that could hide unexpected threats. They piled their finds into shopping carts, careful to keep the rattling to a minimum. Yet the group's caution wasn't enough. As they neared the exit, dragging carts laden with vital supplies, an unearthly chorus rose from deeper inside the building. Slithering, scuttling, heavy footsteps mingled in a cacophony of monstrous activity. Then, from behind a collapsed pile of shelves, a cluster of hybrids emerged, their combined features almost impossible to parse in a single glance. One had the elongated limbs of a praying mantis fused with something mammalian. Another looked like a pit bull with a massive angled horn. A third possessed shriveled bat-like wings, though it didn't appear capable of flight. Each one glared with hunger. "Run!" Ava barked. Vince and Joe seized a cart each, wheels squeaking against the slick floor. The other survivors followed, cartless but armed. The creatures charged, letting out roars and shrieks that deafened the ears. Shells rattled, toppling under the brunt of their movement. Security gates near the exit had partially slid down from earlier damage, leaving a narrow gap. The survivors skidded toward it, hearts hammering. All that food and precious medicine would be pointless if they couldn't escape alive. Joe unclipped a flare from her belt, one she'd found earlier by the pharmacy, and lit it. She hurled it behind them, casting a sudden bright red glare. The hybrids screeched, disoriented by the sudden glare in the darkness, giving the group a chance to push the carts through the gap. One or two of the creatures lunged forward, but Ava unleashed a quick burst from the makeshift flamethrower, forcing them to recoil. With a final shove, they managed to squeeze themselves and the carts outside into the pounding rain. They ran for the truck, the red glow of the flare illuminating the supermarket's sliding doors behind them. Halfway across the lot, Joe heard an ominous scraping. She glanced back to see two of the abominations forcing their way through the door, jaws open in grotesque fury. Joe and Ava lifted the heavier supplies first, while the others kept watch. The scorpion line from before re-emerged at the edge of the lot, pacing, tail flicking. It let out a guttural growl, as if waiting for a prime moment to strike. They frantically heaved the last of the cargo over the tailgate before scrambling into the truck's cab. Ava yanked the steering wheel under her sweaty palms, turned the key, and prayed the engine would comply. It roared to life, albeit unevenly, and the pickup lurched forward. Thunder crashed as they sped away. The monstrous silhouettes became smaller in the rearview mirror, but their cries echoed, a reminder that they'd soon be followed if they lingered. Everyone fell silent, shaking from the near escape. Feverish relief teetered on the brink of despair, because the city remained a war zone. They had enough food and supplies for perhaps a couple of weeks if rationed carefully, but it wouldn't solve the fundamental problem. The hybrids roamed freely, and each day brought new mutations crawling from the building ruins where the splicing labs had once been hidden. Back at the library, the survivors offloaded their haul. The single lamp in the reading room bathed them in a wan glow as they took stock. At least 6 cans of various vegetables, beans, some powdered milk, a few boxes of pasta, and a trove of medical items, enough to buy precious time. Joe noticed a creeping sense of responsibility bearing down on everyone, especially Vince, who looked at the supplies with a glint of hope. He meticulously organized antibiotics, gauze, and water purification tablets with the same care he'd once used in an ambulance. As they strategized, the reality was clear. They couldn't just wait. If the city was quarantined, it might remain that way indefinitely. Ava argued that with the truck operational, they should consider an escape attempt. Possibly leave the city limits under cover of darkness, find a place that wasn't overrun by these man-made terrors. Others pointed out that the roads might be blocked or destroyed, or full of armed guards under orders to shoot anything trying to break quarantine. They'd also heard rumors of mutated beasts expanding territory beyond the city. No place in the region sounded truly safe. Jo stared at her camera. She had documented a fraction of the horrors unleashed. While fear of the unknown haunted her, something else lingered, a moral imperative to expose the truth behind the fiasco. If these labs existed here, they could exist elsewhere. And if the same protocols were used in other locations, the world might soon face an army of these hybrids. Night fell again, the battered library reduced to a pool of shifting shadows. Rain battered the windows, the wind howling between cracks in the deteriorating walls. Long hours stretched ahead, with each survivor lost in their thoughts. That night, a single monstrous roar rose above the storm, reverberating across the city. It was deeper, more resonant than any sound so far. Perhaps a new apex creation had been born among the hybrids, forging a path of devastation. The survivors exchanged uneasy glances, hearts pounding at what such a beast might look like. The following morning, Jo convened everyone in the reading room once more. Though exhaustion etched every face, a cautious resolve shone in their eyes. They realized they needed to coordinate a plan beyond just scavenging. Each revealed the possibility they might have to leave soon or risk being cornered by the multiplying chimeras. Yet, the group felt tethered by a sense of loyalty to the city, or at least to the memories of what it used to be. "We can try heading for the outskirts," Ava suggested, voice hushed but strong. "If we're lucky, we might find a path." Vince nodded. "There might be refugees outside the quarantine who need medical help, and we can't afford to sit here forever." The mother who lost her daughter wept quietly, but seemed resigned. "If there's hope somewhere else, we should at least try," she murmured. Jo looked at the boarded-up windows, and the decorative archways that once made this library a pillar of knowledge. It felt surreal that these walls now served as a fortress. "Before we go," she said, "I want to find that facility, the hidden lab, take some pictures, document the truth of what happened here. People need to understand what caused all this." A moment of tense discussion followed. Some insisted it was suicidal to approach the epicenter of the splicing meltdown. Others argued that exposing this secret might save countless lives elsewhere. In the end, Jo decided she would make the trek alone if needed. She slung her camera over her shoulder, determined. Yet, one by one, the group refused to let her go alone. They'd do it together. A day later, they embarked early. The ride through the city's ruined streets felt like traversing a nightmare that wove seamlessly between broken reality and rotting illusions. Each block offered remnants of despair, shadowy corners where something might lurk, the occasional disfigured beast stalking in silhouette. Eventually, they found the collapsed parking garage that had initially spewed out abominations. The air around it seemed thicker, suffused with an indefinable chemical tang. Jo stepped out, camera ready, capturing images of the twisted architecture. The ground was littered with shattered glass, and even now they could hear distant screeches echoing from below. A labyrinth of corridors led them deeper, guided by old security signs partially sprayed with cryptic symbols. They passed offices full of overturned equipment and wide hallways lined with shattered tubes that might have once contained embryonic prototypes. Fear gnawed at the edges of the group, especially as they saw fresh claw marks gouged into the concrete walls. But pressing onward, they finally reached a central chamber strewn with toppled apparatuses and cracked computers. Exposed wires dangled like severed veins from the ceiling. Here, Jo's camera flash illuminated more shattered containment pods, each large enough to hold a human-sized creature. Stray tubes spat pungent fluids, forming murky puddles. Rusted metal tables with restraining straps hinted at sickening experiments performed on living specimens. Filtration systems hissed in corners, barely functional. The group spread out, carefully stepping around broken glass and sticky patches of unidentifiable slime. With each flash of Cho's camera, the horrifying evidence became immortalized. The pictures told a tale of hubris and secrecy, of life manipulated and forced into unnatural fusions. Amid the clutter, they found documents partially burned or shredded. Words like enhanced muscle fiber, adrenal override, and predator intelligence assimilation recurred. Joe's horror grew with every line she read. Vince shakily picked up a damp page describing Phase 4 multi-species hybridization. A wave of nausea hit as he realized how far these experiments had gone. "This is more than just an accident," Joe said quietly, scanning another sheet. They pushed past every ethical boundary." Her words were cut short by a thunderous roar, reverberating through the chamber. The floor quaked, dust raining from the ceiling. Ava swung her flashlight around, revealing a hole in the wall partially hidden by twisted metal beams. A monstrous shape appeared, framed by broken concrete. It towered above them, a tangle of sinew and spines, with a vulturous skull-like face and broad shoulders that ended in tree-trunk arms. It glowered with glowing yellow eyes, its chest heaving. In a single heartbeat, the creature unleashed a guttural bellow and charged. The group scattered, adrenaline spiking. Ava aimed her flamethrower, releasing a burst, but the monstrous form shrugged it off with terrifying ease. Only half sin. Its thick hide must have included amphibian slime, or some layered carapace that resisted flame. Vince swung a heavy metal rod, connecting it to the creature's flank. It hardly flinched. Joe scrambled back, snapping a few desperate photos. The flash enraged the beast, and it pounded its fists, smashing a nearby console into shards. A swat of its colossal arm missed Ava by mere inches, sending up a spray of sparks from shattered wiring. She tumbled sideways, nearly losing her grip on the flamethrower. Another blow flung one of the survivors into a bank of broken monitors. Joe's heart clenched as the impact left them dazed and struggling for breath. Vince and two others brandished improvised weapons, frantically circling to divide the monster's attention. As the beast advanced to finish off its dazed target, Joe dove in with her crowbar, jamming it under a protruding ridge of exoskeleton near its shoulder. The creature roared, and with a savage twist, she felt the crowbar dig into spongy flesh beneath the scaled plating. Furious and in pain, the hybrid spun, giving Ava a brief opening. She triggered the flamethrower again, this time focusing on the exposed area Joe had revealed. Fire licked hungrily, and the monster bellowed in agony, stumbling. Vince seized the chance to drive a metal pipe into its chest. With a last tortured shriek, the gargantuan hybrid collapsed in a plume of smoke and flames, thrashing before going still. Panting and covered in sweat, the survivors gathered themselves. Their companion knocked into the monitors groaned, but Vince declared them still alive, just battered. Joe's hands trembled as she cradled her camera, the crowbar's end still smeared with thick, dark fluid. "We have what we came for," she said, voice shaking. "Evidence that this place, the splicing, these horrors, it's real. It happened." They made their way back up, battered and haunted. The storm had quieted, leaving behind a stagnant drizzle. The group trudged toward the truck, mindful that more creatures might bar their escape. Eventually they reached the vehicle, started the engine, and pulled away from the cluster of collapsed structures. The night draped the city in darkness once more, but inside that truck, an unspoken surge of determination passed among them. They had survived, scarred, yes, but alive, carrying proof of the atrocities. And so they drove through the ruined streets, no longer cowering in the face of savage roars echoing off the skyscrapers. In the back of the truck, battered crates of supplies clinked as they navigated potholes. The city around them wasn't safe, possibly never would be again. But they had a chance, not just for survival, but for redemption and truth. As the road stretched out, each mile carried them farther from the chaos, deeper into a darkness tinged with a fragment of hope, and in Joe's camera rested the images that might finally blow open the secrecy. A warning to the rest of humanity: the splices had gone wrong, and there would be no erasing what those twisted experiments had unleashed upon the world.